In this video, we'll take a look at SQL functions and how they are used. We'll only be able to look at a few functions now. MySQL has over 400 functions, with many of those used for specialized purposes. We'll look at a few of the more commonly used functions. To start with, we need to consider what are functions. In SQL, a function is an operation that acts on one or more column values to produce a result value. A function can be used to calculate a result. It can be used to transform a value, and it can be used to format a value. You'll see some examples of those function usages in this video. Now, if you are familiar with a programming language like PHP, JavaScript, Java, C#, or whatever, you'll immediately see that for most of the functions in SQL, there are equivalent features available in the programming language that you work with. So the question is, should you use a function in SQL, or just return the data from the database and use functions in the programming language? It turns out there is really no good answer to this question without knowing what the application is doing, that is, how is the data being used. It also depends upon who is writing the SQL and who is writing the application. In some cases, you will write both the SQL and the application code. In other cases, a database administrator, or DBA, is responsible for writing all of the SQL code, and the application developer works with what is provided. So we won't spend any more time trying to decide if a particular function should be used in SQL or in the application. Instead, we'll just look at how functions are used in SQL. For our first example of a function, we'll look at the string concatenation function, concat. Concatenate simply means to join together. When designing a table, it is usually a good idea to split string data into separate columns. For example, a person's name usually has at least two columns, first name and last name. By splitting the name into two parts, it is easier to sort the data by the name values. Another example of splitting a string value is with an address. When you get a package shipped to you or receive a letter in the mail, the last line of the address is typically the city, state, and zip code all on one line. But in the database, it is usually best to split the city, state, and zip code into three separate columns. So when the data is split into separate columns, you can use the concat function to join the column values together. Here you see an example of joining my last name and first name using a comma and a space as a separator between the two names. The concat function takes a list of column names or string values. You can also put a number into the list and the number is converted into a string. There is no documented limit for the number of items that you can use in the concat function. The list of values that are inside the parentheses are called the arguments to the function. Many people also call the list of values parameters. Technically, arguments is the correct term, but parameters is so commonly used that in everyday usage, it is okay to say parameters. Notice that we're using the as keyword to assign the column alias professor to the result value. So when you run this statement, you'll see the value displayed in the result grid under the column heading professor. Keep in mind, you can use a column name in place of the quoted string values shown here. For example, if you have a column named last name and a column named first name, you could put those column names into the concat function in place of the quoted strings. MySQL includes a convenience function named concatws. It is called a convenience function because it provides a more convenient way to perform concatenation compared with the concat function. Concatws stands for concatenate with separator. Concatenating many values together with a separator is such a commonly needed requirement that MySQL provides this function. For example, you might want to create a result set in a comma-separated variable or CSV format. This example shows how to use the concatws function. Notice that the first argument is the string value that will be used as the separator. In the example, the separator is a comma followed by a blank space. So the rule is you can have 0 or more characters as the separator value that is to be put between each of the concatenated values. Notice that I said 0 or more. It is okay to use an empty string as a separator. An empty string is when you have two single quote characters right next to each other without a blank space. If you put a blank space between single quotes, you'll get a blank space as the separator. Following the first argument, which is the separator, you can have as many column names or values as needed. Each of the remaining arguments is concatenated with the separator value. So you can see that I built up a string of my name followed by my degrees. The resulting column alias is named Professor, and that is what you see in the result grid. Keep in mind that concatws is a MySQL function. If you need to work with other types of databases, for example, SQL Server or Oracle, those databases might not have a function of the same name. Now we'll look at numeric operations. Strictly speaking, numeric operations are not functions, but we'll look at them now so that you'll know how to work with them. This simple select statement shows an example of the four common arithmetic operators. For each operation, we use the as keyword to assign a column alias for the resulting value. Because add is an SQL keyword, we need to surround it with the MySQL reserved word delimiter. On the previous slide, you saw the arithmetic operators. Now we'll look at how you can control how the resulting value is displayed using the format function. In this select statement, we are using two divide operations to produce two resulting values. In the first operation, with the resulting value divide, MySQL displays the result using 4 decimal places. The second operation uses the format function to format the result, divide 2, with 2 decimal places. Look at how the arguments are used in the format function. The first argument is the value that you want formatted. In this example, the argument is actually an arithmetic operation, so the resulting value of the operation is used as the value of the first argument. The second argument in the format function is the number of decimal places. In this example, the value 2 is specified. So in addition to knowing about the format function, you should also notice that an argument value can be the result of an operation or the result of another function. You'll see functions within functions quite a bit in SQL. Functions within functions are sometimes referred to as embedded functions.